He thought humiliating her at gate 14 would make him look powerful. But before the night was over, the entire airport would learn the truth about the quiet woman he had just denied. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Rain hammered against the towering glass walls of O'Hare International Airport as travelers hurried across the polished marble floors, dragging carry-on luggage behind them. The loudspeaker echoed with delayed departures and gate changes, while exhausted passengers crowded around charging stations, clutching paper coffee cups and staring at glowing screens. Near gate 14, under the cold white lights of the executive boarding lane, Evelyn Mercer stood quietly beside the window overlooking the runway. At 42 years old, she carried herself with a calm dignity that didn't demand attention, though few people noticed her long enough to recognize it. Her beige trench coat was damp from the storm outside, her blonde hair slightly tousled by the Chicago wind, and her leather weekender bag looked old enough to have traveled thousands of miles. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. No designer logos. No jewelry except for a thin silver watch partially hidden beneath her sleeve. To most people passing by, she looked like an ordinary woman returning from a long business trip. And that was exactly why Tyler Brooks dismissed her the second he saw her. Tyler adjusted the sleeves of his Navy airport operations jacket as he watched passengers line up for executive platinum boarding. At 31, he had built a reputation for being strict, efficient, and deeply obsessed with status. He noticed expensive watches before faces, tailored suits before personalities. In his mind, first-class travelers looked a certain way, acted a certain way, and carried themselves with visible wealth. Evelyn Mercer fit none of those expectations. He narrowed his eyes as she stepped toward the priority scanner. "Ma'am," he said sharply, extending his arm to block her path. "This line is for executive platinum passengers only." Evelyn looked up calmly and handed him her digital boarding pass. "I'm aware," she replied softly. Tyler barely glanced at the screen before smirking. "Uh-huh." He tilted the scanner away from her and folded his arms. "You people always try this." Several nearby passengers looked over immediately. A businessman in a charcoal suit lowered his newspaper. A young couple exchanged amused glances. Evelyn remained composed. "There may be a mistake," she said politely. "Would you mind scanning it again?" Tyler let out a dry laugh loud enough for others to hear. "Trust me, ma'am. These upgrades don't just magically appear because someone walks into the wrong lane." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the boarding area. The atmosphere shifted instantly. People began looking at Evelyn not as a traveler, but as a problem. Tyler stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound condescending rather than aggressive. "Economy boarding starts in 20 minutes. I suggest you wait over there." He pointed toward the crowded general seating area packed with restless passengers and crying children. For a moment, Evelyn simply looked at him, her blue eyes steady, unshaken. Rainwater slowly dripped from the edge of her coat onto the marble floor. "My ticket was confirmed this morning," she said. "Then someone clearly made an error," Tyler interrupted. "Because executive platinum clients don't show up looking like this." The words landed harder than he realized. Nearby conversations stopped. A gate agent standing behind the counter glanced down awkwardly at her keyboard. Someone farther back quietly began recording on their phone. Tyler didn't notice. He was too focused on the small feeling of authority swelling inside him. Evelyn slowly lowered her boarding pass. She could feel dozens of eyes studying her clothes, her worn travel bag, her silence. Most people would have argued. Some would have shouted. But Evelyn Mercer had spent years learning something far more powerful than anger. She had learned patience. And patience, in rooms filled with arrogance, often became the loudest thing of all. She reached calmly into her coat pocket and removed her phone. Tyler sighed dramatically. "If you're calling customer service, save yourself the trouble. Security will tell you the same thing." Evelyn ignored him completely. Her fingers moved quietly across the screen as thunder rolled outside the terminal windows. Just one message. Short, precise, sent directly to a private executive thread very few people in the company even knew existed. Tyler shook his head and waved the next passengers forward. Next executive platinum boarding group. Behind him, the scanner beeped repeatedly as travelers stepped past Evelyn without making eye contact. But 30 seconds later, something unusual happened. The boarding scanner suddenly froze mid-check. The monitor flickered black. One of the gate agents frowned. That's weird. Another employee's phone began vibrating. Then another. Across the terminal, a supervisor looked up sharply from his tablet. And for the first time that evening, Tyler Brooks felt the smallest crack of uncertainty begin forming beneath his confidence. The atmosphere inside Gate 14 shifted so subtly at first that most passengers did not immediately notice it. The rain still hammered against the enormous windows overlooking the runway, luggage wheels still rattled across the marble floors, and overhead announcements continued echoing through the terminal. But behind the boarding counter, panic had quietly entered the room. The young gate agent nearest the frozen scanner tapped the screen twice before looking up nervously. "Tyler, the system just locked me out." Tyler barely glanced at her. "Restart it." "I already tried." Another employee suddenly checked her phone and frowned. "Why am I getting emergency operations notifications?" Tyler exhaled impatiently. Probably another weather delay. But then his own company phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. Once, twice, then continuously. He pulled it out with visible irritation, expecting another routine operations message. Instead, his expression tightened. "Incoming call. Regional Operations Director." Tyler immediately straightened his posture before answering. "Sir." The voice on the other end sounded unusually tense. "Who is currently at Gate 14? Tyler glanced around, confused by the question. "We are boarding Flight 228 to New York." "I know what flight it is," the director snapped. "I asked who is there." Tyler hesitated. "Just passengers, sir." A long silence followed. Then came the sentence that caused the first real crack in his confidence. "Do not let anyone board until I arrive." The line disconnected instantly. Tyler lowered the phone slowly. Nearby employees exchanged uneasy looks. Across the gate area, Evelyn Mercer remained seated calmly near the window, one ankle crossed neatly over the other, her hands resting quietly atop her weathered leather bag. She looked completely detached from the tension now spreading around the terminal. A businessman who had laughed earlier now kept glancing toward her with growing uncertainty. Even the young woman recording on her phone lowered it slightly, sensing something had changed. The room no longer felt entertaining. It felt dangerous. Tyler tried to regain control. "Everybody stay focused," he said sharply to the gate staff. "It is probably just a systems issue." But even he no longer believed it. Another phone rang. This time it belonged to the senior gate supervisor stationed 2 counters away. Her face turned pale within seconds of answering. "Yes, sir, she is here right now." Tyler looked over immediately. "Who?" The supervisor ignored him completely. "No, nobody informed us." "Yes, understood." She hung up and immediately began fixing her blazer with trembling hands. Tyler stepped toward her. "What is going on?" Before she could answer, 3 airport executives suddenly appeared from the far side of the terminal, moving faster than anyone had ever seen executives move inside an airport. Expensive dress shoes struck sharply against the marble floor as passengers instinctively stepped aside. One of them was Daniel Reeves, Vice President of Passenger Operations for the entire Midwest region. Tyler recognized him instantly from corporate conferences and leadership training videos. Executives at that level did not come down to boarding gates during storms, especially not at nearly 9 o'clock at night. The conversations around Gate 14 died almost immediately. Daniel Reeves scanned the room with visible urgency before his eyes landed on Evelyn. His entire expression changed. "Oh no," he whispered under his breath. Tyler stared at him in confusion. Daniel walked directly past every employee without acknowledging them. He stopped in front of Evelyn Mercer and lowered his voice respectfully. "Ms. Mercer, I sincerely apologize for the delay." The terminal went completely silent. Even the overhead boarding announcements seemed distant for a moment. Tyler felt his stomach tighten. Evelyn looked up at Daniel calmly, as though none of this surprised her. "Good evening, Daniel," she said softly. "I did not intend to create disruption." "The disruption is our responsibility," Daniel replied immediately. Behind him, 2 additional executives stood frozen with embarrassment written across their faces. Tyler blinked rapidly. "Mercer." The name hit him all at once. "Mercer Aviation Holdings." the parent company that had quietly acquired controlling ownership of the airline less than 8 months earlier. The same acquisition every employee in the company had been required to study during corporate restructuring seminars. Tyler suddenly remembered the article he had skimmed weeks ago. Evelyn Mercer, founder, chief executive officer, estimated net worth in the billions, known for avoiding media appearances and traveling anonymously whenever possible. His mouth went dry. Around him, passengers slowly began recognizing the name as whispers spread across the gate like wildfire. Wait, that is her. No way. She owns the airline? The businessman with the newspaper lowered it completely now, staring openly. Tyler looked at Evelyn again, but this time he no longer saw an ordinary traveler in a damp trench coat. He saw the woman capable of ending careers with a single phone call. And suddenly, every sentence he had spoken replayed in his mind with horrifying clarity. Executive platinum clients do not show up looking like this. You people always try? This. Call security. Tyler felt heat flood his face as reality settled over the room like heavy concrete. The quiet woman he had humiliated in front of hundreds of strangers had never once raised her voice, never once defended herself, never once reminded anyone who she was. She had simply watched, calmly, patiently, while the entire airport unknowingly walked straight into its own disgrace. Tyler Brooks could feel every pair of eyes in Gate 14 turning toward him now, and for the first time in his career, the authority he once wore like armor suddenly felt painfully fragile. The marble floors beneath him seemed colder, the terminal lights harsher. Even the sound of rain against the massive windows no longer felt calming. It felt like judgment. Daniel Reeves stood beside Evelyn Mercer with visible tension in his posture, carefully choosing every word. Ms. Mercer, transportation has already been arranged to move you privately to the aircraft once boarding is complete. Evelyn offered a small nod. That will not be necessary. Her voice remained soft, controlled, almost gentle. I would prefer the passengers board first. They have already been delayed because of the weather. Several nearby travelers exchanged stunned looks. The older businessman with the newspaper lowered his head slightly, embarrassed by how quickly he had assumed the worst about her earlier. A young mother sitting near the charging station quietly whispered to her teenage daughter, "That is what real class looks like." Tyler heard every word. His throat tightened. One of the junior gate agents beside him leaned closer and whispered nervously, "You argued with the owner of the company?" Tyler snapped back quietly. She never said who she was. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew how weak they sounded. Because deep down, he understood the truth. He had not judged Evelyn based on information. He had judged her based on appearance. Her coat, her shoes, her silence. The entire situation had exposed something uglier than a simple mistake. It had revealed the kind of man he became whenever he believed nobody important was watching. Across the terminal, airport employees began moving with almost frantic urgency. A hospitality manager arrived carrying bottled water and fresh towels. Another employee offered access to the private lounge. Someone even attempted to clear the entire boarding area for Evelyn alone. But she calmly refused every special treatment with the same quiet composure that made the executives even more uncomfortable. "The passengers have already waited long enough," she said. "Please continue normal boarding procedures." Daniel Reeves nodded immediately. Of course. Tyler stood frozen several feet away, unsure whether to speak or disappear. His face had lost all color. Moments earlier he had been confident, almost amused by humiliating what he assumed was an ordinary traveler. Now every second of silence stretched painfully longer. Then Evelyn slowly turned toward him. The entire gate seemed to stop breathing. Tyler immediately straightened. "Ms. Mercer, his voice cracked slightly before he cleared his throat. "I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding." Evelyn studied him quietly for several seconds. Not angrily, not coldly. Somehow that made it worse. "A misunderstanding," she repeated softly. Tyler swallowed hard. "I made assumptions that I should not have made." Behind him, several employees lowered their eyes. Even Daniel Reeves looked tense, waiting for her response. Evelyn rose calmly from her seat, smoothing the sleeve of her trench coat before stepping closer. She was not intimidating in the traditional sense. She did not tower over people. She did not raise her voice. Yet somehow the silence around her carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Do you know why I travel without escorts or announcements?" she asked. Tyler shook his head carefully. "No, ma'am. Because the way people treat strangers reveals who they truly are." Her words landed over the terminal with devastating precision. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. Evelyn glanced briefly around the gate area at the watching passengers, the nervous employees, the executives standing stiffly nearby. "Most people are kind only when they think someone has status," she continued quietly. "But dignity should not depend on a boarding pass, a bank account, or a tailored suit." Tyler lowered his eyes completely now. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Somewhere near the back of the terminal, a rolling suitcase tipped over, the sharp sound echoing awkwardly through the silence before quickly disappearing again. Evelyn looked back toward the rain-covered windows overlooking the runway, lights blinking through the storm. "Tonight was not humiliating because of what happened to me," she said. "It was humiliating because hundreds of people watched another human being get disrespected and decided it was entertaining." Several passengers visibly shifted uncomfortably. The young woman who had been recording earlier slowly put her phone away entirely. Daniel Reeves exhaled quietly, knowing this moment would travel through the company far faster than any official report. Tyler finally forced himself to speak again. "I understand if you want me terminated." Evelyn turned toward him once more. "Termination teaches fear," she replied. "Character is harder to teach." Tyler blinked in surprise. The answer was not what anyone expected. She could have ended his career with a sentence. Everyone there knew it. And somehow her restraint made the shame even more unbearable. Evelyn picked up her weathered leather bag calmly. "What happens next is not my decision alone," she said softly. "But I hope you remember this feeling the next time someone who looks ordinary stands in front of you." Tyler stood speechless as she walked slowly toward the boarding lane. Behind her, the entire terminal remained silent. Because in that moment, every person at Gate 14 realized the same uncomfortable truth. The most powerful woman in the airport had also been the quietest person in the room. The boarding lane remained completely silent as Evelyn Mercer stepped forward beneath the cold terminal lights, her calm presence somehow commanding more attention than the executives surrounding her. Outside, lightning flashed across the Chicago skyline, briefly illuminating the rain-covered runway while airport crews moved through the storm in glowing orange jackets. Inside Gate 14, nobody seemed interested in their flights anymore. Every eye followed Evelyn. Daniel Reeves quickly motioned toward the gate scanner. "Please clear the lane immediately," he instructed the employees. His voice remained professional, but the tension underneath it was unmistakable. The same gate agents who had avoided Evelyn minutes earlier now moved nervously to assist her, their hands trembling as they rearranged boarding equipment and reopened the frozen system. Tyler Brooks stood several feet away, feeling strangely disconnected from his own body. He watched everything unfold like someone witnessing the collapse of a version of himself he no longer recognized. The confidence he once carried so easily had disappeared completely. In its place remained only embarrassment and the crushing realization that hundreds of strangers had just watched his character fail in real time. One of the younger employees approached him carefully. "Tyler, corporate human resources is already asking for statements." He closed his eyes briefly. Of course they were. Situations like this did not stay inside airports. Someone had already uploaded footage online. He could practically see the headlines forming in his mind. "Airport manager publicly humiliates airline owner. Millions of views by morning. A career destroyed before sunrise." Across the terminal, Evelyn paused near the scanner as an elderly woman struggled to lift a carry-on suitcase onto the conveyor belt. Without hesitation, Evelyn stepped over and gently helped position the bag herself. The older passenger blinked in surprise. "Thank you, sweetheart." Evelyn smiled warmly. "Of course." Several nearby travelers exchanged quiet looks after witnessing it. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The woman with the most power in the building had been the only person behaving like everyone else mattered. Daniel Reeves watched the interaction carefully, his expression tightening further. He had worked in corporate aviation for 23 years and understood public image better than most executives. But this was bigger than reputation damage. Evelyn Mercer had built her empire around a single philosophy that employees discussed constantly during leadership seminars. Dignity first. She believed airlines were not merely transportation companies. They were reflections of how society treated strangers. Tonight, her own company had failed that standard in the most public way possible. Daniel stepped closer to Tyler. Do you understand who she is beyond the title? Tyler swallowed hard, but said nothing. Daniel lowered his voice. She started traveling anonymously after her father died. Tyler looked up slowly. What? He spent 37 years working baggage handling for a regional airline. Daniel glanced toward Evelyn near the boarding lane. Most executives never knew because she rarely talks about it publicly. But she built this company after watching people ignore workers like him for decades. Tyler felt the blood drain from his face all over again. Suddenly, the humiliation felt even worse. He had not just insulted a wealthy executive. He had violated the exact values the company itself had been built upon. Daniel continued quietly. Every year, she visits airports unannounced to observe how passengers and employees are treated when nobody thinks leadership is watching. Tyler stared at Evelyn in disbelief. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. This had never been about first-class seating or a boarding pass. It had been a test of humanity, and he had failed it completely. Nearby, passengers slowly resumed boarding, though conversations remained hushed. A middle-aged man in a business suit stepped beside Tyler before scanning his own ticket. For what it is worth, he said quietly, most of us would not survive being judged by our worst moment. Then he walked onto the jet bridge. Tyler stood frozen after hearing the words. It was the first kindness anyone had shown him since the situation began. And somehow that hurt almost as much as the humiliation itself. At the boarding scanner, the gate agent nervously handed Evelyn her printed confirmation. We upgraded your seat to the private executive cabin, Ms. Mercer. Evelyn glanced at the paper briefly before handing it back. Please return it to the passenger wait list. The employee blinked in confusion. Ma'am, there are military families and delayed passengers in this terminal tonight, Evelyn replied. Softly. Someone else probably needs the space more than I do. The room fell quiet again. Even Tyler looked stunned. Wealth, power, influence. She possessed more of it than anyone there. Yet she moved through the world with none of the arrogance people usually associated with status. As Evelyn stepped toward the jet bridge entrance, she paused one final time and turned back toward the terminal. Her eyes briefly met Tyler's again. Not with anger, not even disappointment anymore. Just sadness. And somehow that expression stayed with him more painfully than punishment ever could. Because in that moment Tyler Brooks understood something that would follow him long after the storm outside disappeared from the Chicago sky. The worst mistakes in life often begin with small moments of arrogance that feel completely harmless at the time. The jet bridge hummed softly beneath the steady rhythm of rain pounding against the airport windows as passengers slowly filed onto Flight 228. But the emotional weight hanging over Gate 14 remained impossible to ignore. Even after Evelyn Mercer disappeared down the boarding corridor, the silence she left behind still lingered across the terminal like a quiet storm nobody knew how to escape. Tyler Brooks remained standing near the scanner long after boarding resumed, his hands clasped tightly behind his back as though holding himself together through sheer force. Every employee around him moved carefully now, avoiding eye contact, speaking in hushed voices that sounded almost afraid to disturb the atmosphere. A few passengers glanced toward Tyler with expressions ranging from pity to disapproval, but none of them spoke directly to him anymore. The spectacle had ended. What remained was the aftermath. Daniel Reeves stood near the counter reviewing incoming messages on his tablet, while senior managers quietly gathered nearby. The airline's internal executive channels had exploded within minutes. Someone from corporate communications was already asking whether media outlets had obtained footage. Human resources wanted statements from every employee present. The legal department was demanding a full incident report before midnight. And somewhere above all of them sat Evelyn Mercer, the woman who technically had the power to remove every executive in that terminal if she chose to. Yet she had boarded the plane without demanding punishment, without making threats, without humiliating anyone in return. That fact unsettled Daniel more than anger would have, because people who wielded power quietly were often the ones who saw everything most clearly. Tyler finally stepped toward him. Sir, his voice sounded weaker now, stripped of the authority he once projected so confidently. Daniel looked up slowly. Corporate wants me suspended immediately, right? Daniel did not answer at first. He simply studied the younger man standing in front of him. Tyler suddenly looked far less like a manager and more like someone confronting the consequences of becoming the wrong version of himself. The review board will decide in the morning, Daniel said carefully. But honestly, Tyler, that is not the biggest problem. Tyler frowned slightly. Daniel lowered the tablet in his hands. You embarrassed yourself in front of passengers tonight. That is fixable. But you also embarrassed people who trusted you to represent this company's values. Tyler stared silently at the marble floor. Daniel continued. Do you know why Ms. Mercer refuses executive escorts? Tyler shook his head slowly, though part of him already feared the answer. Because she believes power creates distance. Daniel glanced toward the rain-covered runway lights outside the terminal windows. She thinks the moment leaders stop experiencing ordinary treatment, they stop understanding ordinary people. Tyler felt a knot tighten painfully in his chest. Daniel's voice softened slightly. Most executives travel surrounded by assistants and security teams. Employees become performers around them. Nobody acts naturally. But Ms. Mercer wants truth. He paused briefly. Tonight she got it. Those words landed with brutal force. Tyler suddenly remembered the expression on Evelyn's face when he mocked her clothing. It had not been anger. It had been recognition, as though she had seen this exact behavior many times before. Nearby, one of the younger gate agents quietly approached Daniel holding a tablet. Sir, social media already picked it up. Daniel took the device and exhaled heavily. A blurry video thumbnail filled the screen showing Tyler standing over Evelyn near the boarding lane. Millions of people would form opinions before sunrise. Tyler only needed one look to understand how bad it was. Turn it off, he whispered. The employee obeyed immediately. Across the gate area, the last remaining passengers finished boarding while ground crews prepared the aircraft for departure. The storm outside had begun weakening slightly, but inside the terminal the emotional pressure remained suffocating. Tyler suddenly noticed the older woman Evelyn had helped earlier still sitting near the window waiting for another flight. She watched him quietly for several moments before speaking. Young man. Tyler turned slowly toward her. Yes, ma'am. She adjusted the scarf around her shoulders gently. My husband worked airport maintenance for 30 years. Tyler listened silently. People ignored him constantly, she continued softly. Not because he was a bad man, just because they thought his uniform made him unimportant. Her eyes drifted toward the jet bridge entrance where Evelyn had disappeared earlier. That woman understood something most people never learn. Tyler swallowed hard. What is that? The older woman gave him a tired smile, filled with quiet wisdom. The easiest way to reveal someone's character is to give them a little authority over a stranger. The room fell silent around him once again. Tyler could not answer because deep down he knew she was right. Tonight had not revealed who Evelyn Mercer was. The world already knew she was powerful. Tonight had revealed who he was when he believed someone else was powerless. And somewhere high above the dark clouds over Chicago, the quiet woman he judged by appearance sat calmly inside the aircraft cabin, carrying herself with the same dignity she had shown long before anyone recognized her name. Flight 228 climbed steadily above the storm clouds while the lights of Chicago faded beneath the thick blanket of rain, and inside the quiet cabin, Evelyn Mercer sat alone beside the window staring into the darkness beyond the glass. The seatbelt signs still glowed overhead, casting a soft amber reflection across the polished cabin walls, but most passengers had already settled into silence after the emotionally exhausting evening at the airport. A flight attendant approached carefully carrying a cup of hot tea on a silver tray. Compliments of the captain, Ms. Mercer. Evelyn looked up with a polite smile. Thank you. The attendant hesitated briefly before speaking again. I am very sorry for what happened downstairs. Evelyn wrapped both hands gently around the warm cup. You do not need to apologize for something you did not do. The flight attendant nodded quietly, though the guilt in her expression remained. Everyone in the crew had heard about Gate 14 by now. News traveled quickly inside the airline industry, especially when executives were involved. But this story had spread for another reason entirely. Employees recognized themselves in it. Some saw Tyler Brooks and remembered moments they had judged people too quickly. Others saw Evelyn and remembered what it felt like to be underestimated because of appearance, age, clothing, or status. The entire incident had become something larger than a simple airport confrontation. It had become a mirror. Several rows behind Evelyn, Two businessmen quietly discussed the situation in hushed voices. "I still cannot believe she never pulled rank," one whispered. "Most executives would have demanded someone get fired immediately." The other shook his head slowly. "That is probably why she is who she is." Evelyn heard neither comment. Her attention remained fixed on the rainwater slowly sliding across the window beside her. High above the clouds, the world always felt strangely quieter to her. Simpler. It reminded her of childhood nights waiting for her father to finish late shifts at small regional airports across the Midwest. She could still remember sitting inside old employee lounges doing homework while baggage crews laughed nearby over burnt coffee and vending machine snacks. Most executives never saw those rooms. But Evelyn never forgot them. Her father had taught her something long before she ever built her company. You can tell everything about a person by how they treat workers who cannot benefit them. The memory lingered painfully tonight. Back in Chicago, Tyler Brooks sat alone inside a nearly empty airport conference room beneath fluorescent ceiling lights that suddenly felt far too bright. The terminal outside had quieted considerably after the storm delays eased, but Tyler remained awake staring at the incident report on the table in front of him. Every sentence felt humiliating to type. Passenger denied boarding lane access based on appearance. Inappropriate public remarks made regarding status expectations. Escalation witnessed by approximately 120 passengers. The words looked even uglier written down. His company phone buzzed again. Another message from corporate human resources requesting a mandatory review meeting at 7 o'clock the following morning. Tyler leaned back heavily in the chair and rubbed his face with both hands. Across the room, Daniel Reeves stood near the window overlooking the dark runway. "You should go home," he said quietly. Tyler gave a bitter laugh. "I do not think sleep is happening tonight." Daniel remained silent for a moment before speaking again. "Do you know what surprised me most?" Tyler looked up tiredly. "What?" Daniel folded his arms. "She defended everyone except herself." Tyler frowned slightly. Daniel continued. "She protected the passengers from delays, protected employees from public embarrassment, even protected you from immediate termination." The room fell quiet. Tyler stared at the tabletop for several long seconds. "Why?" he finally asked. Daniel looked out at the blinking runway lights disappearing into the rain. "Because some people understand that humiliation changes nothing." Tyler slowly absorbed the words. Hours earlier, he would have assumed power meant dominance, control, authority. But Evelyn Mercer had demonstrated something entirely different. Real power was restraint. Real power was remaining calm while others lost dignity around you. Daniel glanced toward him carefully. "What happens tomorrow matters," he said. "But what matters more is whether you learn anything from tonight." Tyler looked down at his wrinkled operations jacket hanging over the back of the chair. For years he had associated professionalism with appearances, expensive clothing, polished image, elite customers. Tonight, one quiet woman carrying an old leather bag had dismantled all of those assumptions without ever raising her voice. Somewhere deep down, Tyler realized the humiliation he felt now was not punishment from Evelyn Mercer. It was disappointment in himself. And that realization hurt far more than losing a job ever could. Above the clouds, Flight 228 continued east toward New York while the cabin lights dimmed softly around exhausted travelers drifting to sleep. Evelyn Mercer closed her eyes briefly as the engines hummed steadily through the darkness. She had spent years building an airline centered around dignity, believing kindness should never depend on wealth or appearance. Tonight that belief had been tested publicly in front of strangers. But as the aircraft carried her through the quiet sky, one truth remained painfully clear. The world did not change through power alone. Sometimes it changed because one calm person refused to become cruel in return. Morning sunlight spilled across the glass towers of Manhattan as Flight 228 descended toward John F. Kennedy International Airport, and after the long storm-filled night in Chicago, the skies above New York looked almost impossibly clear. Inside the cabin, passengers slowly gathered their belongings while flight attendants moved quietly through the aisle thanking travelers for their patience during the delays. Evelyn Mercer remained seated near the window for a moment longer, watching the city skyline emerge through scattered clouds. The events at Gate 14 still lingered in her mind, though not because of embarrassment. What stayed with her most was how ordinary the situation had felt at first. That was the problem. Disrespect had become normal in too many places. People humiliated strangers every day over appearances, assumptions, and tiny moments of borrowed authority. Last night had only become remarkable because someone eventually recognized her name. But Evelyn knew the deeper truth. Most people who suffered humiliation never received that kind of reversal. The aircraft finally reached the gate, and passengers began filing toward the exit bridge. Several travelers quietly nodded to Evelyn as they passed. A few offered soft smiles filled with newfound respect. One young father carrying a sleeping child paused briefly beside her seat. "Thank you," he said quietly. Evelyn looked slightly surprised. "For what?" The man adjusted the little girl resting against his shoulder. "For showing my daughter what grace looks like." He walked away before she could respond. Evelyn sat silently for several seconds after hearing the words. Then she rose calmly, lifted her weathered leather bag, and stepped into the bright terminal corridor of JFK Airport where executives already waited nearby. 3 black SUVs stood outside the private arrival entrance, along with security personnel and corporate staff dressed in dark tailored suits. Yet despite the visible display of wealth and influence surrounding her now, Evelyn still moved with the same quiet simplicity she carried at Gate 14 the night before. Her assistant, Monica Hale, approached quickly holding a tablet. "Good morning, Ms. Mercer." Evelyn nodded politely. "Morning, Monica." Monica hesitated carefully before speaking again. "The Chicago incident has become national news overnight." Evelyn continued walking. "I assumed it would." Monica looked down at the screen in her hands. "The footage has over 12 million views already. Every major outlet is covering it." Evelyn remained calm. "And Tyler Brooks?" Monica glanced up briefly. "Corporate suspended him pending review." Evelyn stopped walking. Several executives nearby immediately fell silent. Monica carefully lowered the tablet. "There is significant pressure internally to terminate him today." The hallway became very quiet. Airport employees passing nearby recognized Evelyn instantly now, yet none of them dared interrupt the conversation unfolding around her. Evelyn stared through the enormous glass windows overlooking the runways for several moments before finally speaking. "Set up a video call with Chicago headquarters at noon." Monica blinked. "Slightly." "Yes, ma'am." "And include Tyler Brooks." Monica looked surprised. "Personally." Evelyn turned toward her calmly. "Yes." By noon, executives across multiple offices had gathered inside conference rooms throughout the company, while Tyler Brooks sat alone at the far end of a long polished table inside Chicago headquarters, staring nervously at the dark monitor mounted on the wall. He had barely slept. News coverage of the incident played nonstop across television screens in every airport break room in America. Friends stopped responding to his messages hours ago. Even his own parents had called sounding devastated after recognizing him online. Tyler no longer cared about the embarrassment. What haunted him most was hearing his own voice replayed endlessly saying, "Executive platinum clients do not show up looking like this." Every time the clip repeated, he sounded crueler than he remembered. The conference room door opened and Daniel Reeves entered carrying a folder. "She will join in 2 minutes." Tyler nodded silently. The room slowly filled with senior executives, while tension thickened beneath the fluorescent lights. Nobody spoke much. Finally, the large screen flickered to life. Evelyn Mercer appeared seated inside a quiet New York conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She wore the same beige trench coat from the night before draped neatly across the back of her chair. No dramatic introduction. No display of authority. Yet the moment she appeared, every executive instinctively straightened in their seats. Tyler looked down immediately, unable to hold eye contact. Evelyn studied the room calmly before speaking. "Good afternoon." The executives responded almost in unison. "Good afternoon, Ms. Mercer." Her gaze finally settled on Tyler. The room became silent again. Tyler forced himself to look up slowly. "Ms. Mercer," his voice sounded strained. "I know there is nothing I can say to justify my behavior." Evelyn listened quietly without interrupting. Tyler swallowed hard. "But I am deeply ashamed of how I treated you." Evelyn folded her hands carefully on the table in front of her. "This meeting is not about me." Tyler looked confused. Evelyn's voice remained calm, steady, almost painfully gentle. "It is about understanding how easily people forget the humanity of strangers when they believe status determines worth." Nobody in the room moved. The silence felt heavy enough to break under its own weight. And Tyler Brooks suddenly realized this conversation was about to change far more than just his future inside the company. The conference room inside Chicago headquarters remained so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed unnaturally loud as Evelyn Mercer looked across the screen at the executives seated before her. Sunlight poured through the massive Manhattan windows behind her, casting soft reflections across the polished table in New York, while hundreds of miles away Tyler Brooks sat stiffly beneath cold fluorescent lighting, feeling as though the distance between them somehow made the shame even heavier. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody shifted in their seats. Every person in that room understood instinctively that this conversation had moved far beyond corporate policy. Evelyn folded her hands calmly together. "I reviewed the footage several times this morning," she said quietly. Tyler lowered his eyes again. Hearing her mention the footage made his stomach tighten immediately. Millions of strangers had already watched his worst moment. But somehow hearing Evelyn speak about it directly hurt more than the headlines ever could. "What concerns me most," she continued, "is not the public embarrassment. Companies recover from embarrassment." Her gaze moved slowly across the executives on the screen. "What concerns me is how quickly dignity disappeared the moment someone appeared ordinary." Several senior managers visibly shifted uncomfortably, because deep down, many of them understood they had likely made similar assumptions countless times in their own lives. Evelyn's voice remained calm, almost gentle, yet every sentence landed with impossible precision. "The problem with power is not that people abuse it dramatically. Usually they abuse it casually." The room fell completely silent again. Tyler stared motionless at the conference table. Casual cruelty. That was exactly what it had been. Not rage. Not hatred. Just small, dismissive comments delivered with confidence because he assumed nobody important stood in front of him. Evelyn continued softly. "People rarely reveal their character during grand moments. They reveal it during ordinary interactions with strangers who cannot benefit them." Daniel Reeves slowly nodded to himself, hearing the words. Years earlier, those same principles had completely reshaped company training across the airline after Evelyn took control. Yet somewhere along the way, too many employees had begun focusing on luxury branding and elite customer image while forgetting the human philosophy underneath it all. Tyler finally forced himself to speak. "Ms. Mercer, I know I failed." Evelyn looked directly at him through the screen. "Yes," she answered honestly. No anger. No dramatic pause. Just truth. Tyler swallowed hard. Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair. But failure is not always the end of someone's story. Several executives looked up immediately, surprised by the direction of the conversation. Tyler blinked in confusion. He had entered the meeting expecting termination, public humiliation, perhaps even security escorting him out of the building before sunset. Instead, Evelyn Mercer sat before him discussing character as though she still believed it could be rebuilt. "When my father worked baggage handling," she said quietly, "people ignored him constantly." The room listened carefully. Passengers snapped their fingers at him. Executives walked past him without seeing him. Some people assumed his uniform meant his life mattered less. Tyler felt his chest tighten, hearing those words. Evelyn glanced briefly toward the skyline behind her before continuing. "But he used to tell me something when I was young." Her voice softened slightly. "Never become arrogant enough to confuse status with value." Nobody moved. The silence in the room became almost emotional now. Tyler could feel the weight of every word settling deeper inside him. Evelyn looked back toward the screen. "Last night, you judged someone's worth before learning anything about them." Tyler nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. And if I had truly been an ordinary passenger?" Tyler looked down again. That question hurt the most because he already knew the answer. Nothing about his behavior would have changed. Evelyn allowed the silence to linger for several seconds before speaking again. "I am not interested in destroying someone's life over one moment," she said. "But I am interested in whether people are willing to confront who they became during that moment." Daniel Reeves exchanged a quick glance with another executive. The entire room understood now. Evelyn Mercer was offering something Tyler did not deserve easily. A chance to change. Tyler finally looked directly into the screen again, his voice quieter than anyone there had ever heard it. "I do not expect forgiveness." Evelyn studied him calmly. "Forgiveness is meaningless without growth." Then she reached for a folder resting beside her, and opened it slowly. Effective immediately, she continued. Every executive and airport operations manager in this company will complete new dignity and bias training personally overseen by leadership. Several executives straightened immediately. And Mr. Brooks, Evelyn added, if you remain with this company after review, your responsibility will not simply be operations management anymore. Tyler looked confused. Evelyn's blue eyes remained steady. Your responsibility will be making certain no passenger is ever treated the way you treated a stranger at gate 14. The room went completely silent again, because in that moment everyone present understood the real punishment had never been public embarrassment. The real punishment was having to confront the person you became when you believed another human being was beneath you. 3 weeks later, the memory of the stormy night at gate 14 still lingered throughout the airline industry, like a quiet lesson nobody could ignore. Training videos discussing dignity, bias, and customer treatment had already been distributed across every airport under Mercer Aviation Holdings, and employees throughout the company spoke about the incident in careful tones, not because they feared Evelyn Mercer, but because they respected what she had revealed without ever humiliating anyone in return. At Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the atmosphere inside the terminals felt subtly different now. Managers spent more time on the floor instead of hiding in offices. Gate agents greeted exhausted travelers with more patience. Employees who once focused only on premium passengers had begun noticing elderly travelers struggling with luggage, parents carrying tired children, and nervous first-time flyers standing uncertainly near boarding lines. The company culture had not transformed overnight, but something important had shifted. People had started paying attention to one another again. And standing near gate 14 beneath the familiar white terminal lights was Tyler Brooks. But he no longer looked like the same man from that rainy evening. The sharp arrogance that once defined him had disappeared completely, replaced by a quieter professionalism that seemed almost humbled by experience. His suspension had lasted only 1 week, though many employees privately assumed he would never return. Instead, Evelyn Mercer had personally approved his reinstatement under one condition. He would lead the company's new dignity initiative directly at airport level. At first, many people thought it was merely symbolic punishment. But over the following weeks, Tyler took the responsibility more seriously than anyone expected. He attended every training session himself. He apologized personally to employees who witnessed the incident. He even requested assignments at overcrowded gates during delay periods, forcing himself to engage patiently with frustrated travelers instead of hiding behind authority. Some employees remained skeptical. Others quietly admired the effort. But Tyler no longer cared about reputation the way he once had, because now he understood something he had never understood before. Respect could not be demanded through status. It had to be earned through humility. Late one afternoon, as golden sunlight poured through the enormous airport windows overlooking the runway, a nervous young gate agent approached Tyler near the scanner. "Sir." Tyler looked up from his tablet. "Yeah." The employee hesitated awkwardly. "There is a passenger upset about seating near gate 22. She says another supervisor embarrassed her in front of people." Tyler immediately stood. Weeks earlier, he might have rolled his eyes or delegated the issue. But now something in his expression changed instantly. "Let us go." As they walked through the crowded terminal, Tyler noticed details he once ignored completely. The exhausted airport janitor slowly polishing the marble floors. The elderly couple struggling to read departure boards. The single mother balancing coffee cups while carrying a diaper bag across her shoulder. Ordinary people, the kind he used to overlook. Near gate 22, a middle-aged woman stood nervously beside the counter clutching a wrinkled boarding pass, while several impatient travelers waited behind her. Another supervisor looked visibly irritated. "Ma'am, I already explained there is nothing I can do." Tyler stepped forward calmly. "I can help from here." The supervisor immediately stepped aside. Tyler turned toward the passenger with a gentleness that surprised even himself. "What seems to be the issue?" The woman looked embarrassed. "I think I accidentally booked the wrong date." Tyler smiled softly. "That happens more often than you would think." 10 minutes later, after rebooking her onto another flight without extra fees, the woman's eyes filled slightly with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Tyler handed back her documents carefully. "You are welcome." As she walked away, The younger gate agent beside him looked genuinely confused. Why did you waive all the penalties? Tyler glanced toward the terminal windows where planes moved slowly beneath the setting sun. Because sometimes people need kindness more than policies. The employee stared at him for a moment before quietly nodding. Across the country in New York, Evelyn Mercer stood inside her office overlooking Manhattan, while Monica Hale reviewed quarterly reports nearby. Passenger satisfaction scores are rising significantly, Monica said. Evelyn gave a small smile. Good. Monica hesitated before adding, there is one more thing. She handed over a tablet displaying a recent employee recommendation from Chicago headquarters. Tyler Brooks had been nominated by passengers 3 separate times that month for exceptional compassion during travel delays. Evelyn looked at the screen silently for several seconds. Then she set the tablet down gently beside her coffee cup. Outside the office windows, evening sunlight reflected across the city skyline in soft shades of gold and amber. Monica studied her carefully. Do you think people really change? Evelyn looked out across Manhattan thoughtfully before answering. Sometimes humiliation hardens people, she said quietly. But sometimes it introduces them to the version of themselves they never wanted to become. The room fell silent after that. Far below the skyscrapers, thousands of strangers crossed crowded streets without noticing one another, carrying invisible burdens, private fears, quiet struggles no appearance could ever fully reveal. And somewhere inside a busy Chicago airport, a man who once judged strangers by status now paused to help an elderly traveler lift her suitcase onto a conveyor belt before she even asked. Because on one storm-filled night beneath the bright lights of Gate 14, the world had quietly remembered something far more valuable than power. Dignity begins with how we treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer us in return.